Welcome, welcome everyone. And hopefully it's recording already. So welcome everyone. And today it's my great pleasure to continue about one of my favorite topics because I want to know the truth. So let's dive with our source. Let's go to the source and let's explore together about the facts, what's going on, where is the misinformation, what is the truth. And to this conversation, I invited director of George Adamski Foundation, Glenn Steckling. Welcome. And hi, how are you, Glenn? How are you doing today?
Good, Joanna. Very good. I hope you're doing well as well.
Fantastic. I have so many questions, more and more and more.
Well, I know that one of your questions has to do with this notion of disclosure. And this is being floated out there that we are on the brink of releasing finally the information in the revelation that we have extraterrestrial visitors. And I dedicated a whole chapter in my new book about disclosure. I call it the illusion of disclosure, because in reality, we have to look at the total picture. The picture began in the 1940s. And it's not just with Roswell, because there was another retrieval crash that happened in Cape Girardeau in 1941, which is in Missouri, and there are earlier ones around the world as well. But the idea was that this information was kept hyper secret. To give you an example, it was described as a program that had a higher security rating than the Manhattan Project, which was the nuclear bomb. And that was supposed to be the highest in the nation. And this one is yet still higher. So the notion that this information is going to just magically appear or seep out is a fantasy, because they have worked very hard on suppressing it. When General Twining briefed President Harry Truman, Truman was for the idea of going public, and his military staff and the Pentagon staff vetoed that idea. They said no. So it goes to show you who really has power in the country from that standpoint as well. And so they have worked very hard to suppress it. In the late 50s, they worked very hard. Certain groups like an ICAP and Donald Kehoe and Frank Edwards, Professor McDonald, all of these people worked to lobby Congress to be more forceful to release the information. And this included people like General and Senator Barry Goldwater, the Speaker of the House, McCormick, and many, many others, the list of. And the CIA, which has the dominion over the UFO subject, which they took away from the Air Force in the 50s, completely vetoed that idea. And they told basically the Congress or anybody else who asked, they do not have the right to know. And consequently, over the many decades, there's a little bit of bait. It's like fishing. The bait is put on the hook, is dangle it in front of people and tell them, well, it's going to come soon and we're going to give it to you. But you look at what is released and it all contains the same narrative. And that narrative is used in a method of duality, or two different ways. Half of what they tell you, or not half, but portions of what they tell you, is based on actual events and information that has circulated well, so they know that they have little chance of denying that. However, they have realized that what they can do is then take that bait and then redirect the entire emphasis of that situation or subject completely in a different way, which they want to go. And that way they pull the people with them, because in reality, the great portion of the population has no clue what's going on, and that includes military officers of high ranking. I knew a fellow that was once a colonel in the Pentagon, and he was a pilot during the Korean War. He had seen these craft, and even at his security level, they were never given any information. This is very intensely put together and concentrated. And it is just not flung around because you happen to have a uniform or you have to be this or that. This nucleus is very carefully vetted for what they will accommodate and what they will say. Now, we all know, and there's a law in the books, that military law, no less, that anybody who talks about this subject can be persecuted and fined and sent to jail without legal representation, without notification, nothing. They can simply come, grab you, shake you, schluck goes down the hammer, and off you go to prison, and nobody's the wiser. And the question is, why would you have that law even in statute if you deny the fact that the UFOs exist? I will not say UAPs, because UAPs to me is simply an educated syntax in order to divert people away from the value of UFO. Everybody knows UFO and they know what it stands for. UAP is a modern word that is used to confuse the subject.
Let me stop you there just for a second, because I want to ask you, did you also have to sign up something like that, an agreement, and how you were managing with the foundation if you were you are a pilot, and you're not allowed to talk about it? How did you navigate through it?
Well, first of all, I am not a servant of the military. So in other words, I was never in the military. And my father and I discussed the fact that once you do that, you are thereby hindered for the rest of your life of what you can say. Because regardless of what anybody tells you, the true value of the fact is that once you sign those secrecy laws, you are beholden to it for your entire lifetime. It is never wavered. It is never canceled. It is for your entire life. A good friend of my father's uncle was a colonel in the Salt Lake City in the Air Force, and he had seen this craft and he started to talk about it. And one day in the mail, he received a summons to the Pentagon. So he goes to the Pentagon and they pull him into the council room and they say, listen, if you want to continue to receive your pension and your benefits, you will shut up. And they do, because when they look at it, when you look at it, the public is not very appreciative in reality, because you have to put yourself in such a position where you are responsible for the consequences, not them. And the public never gets enough. They always say, give me more, convince me, tell me, whatever. They're never satiated. And so in my case, I continue to do this work without advertising the fact of my profession. I give you an example. Last time we discussed John Lear, whom I had known and I'd flown with. And John Lear worked for a company, and he went to the UFO conferences in his pilot's uniform. And I said to him, idiot, why do you do that?
Why?
Well, because the prestige. Yeah, prestige and recognition. And I said to him, John, what is important is what you say, what you represent. It's not the uniform or the costume that you put on. And you put yourself in a position where soon there's your picture in the newspaper or on the television, and there you are. And it states very clearly that when you were in uniform, you are a representative of the company. I never did that. I was not that stupid. And so consequently, I go, and for many, many decades, my biography listed nothing more than author, lecturer, director, and that sort of thing. Only since I retired have I disclosed the fact of what I did for profession, because they can't do anything to me any longer. But I had very good attorneys that had anybody been foolish enough to challenge me, then we would have gone with a legal action so public, it would have reverberated through the media and through the country. and I would have caused them much more embarrassment that way. So I had a policy of live and let live. You leave me alone, I leave you alone. And I didn't think that my position, and certainly my extracurricular activities, had anything to do with the company that I worked for. It had nothing to do with the function and the authority that I had to exercise when I was on the job. And that was it. Now, when I saw these crafts as a crew member, I would not go and fill out paperwork in order to try to make this vast disclosure. In the 70s, there was a captain who reported to NORAD, or the defense facility, that he had seen a UFO, and he was immediately persecuted by the company. They gave him a year off without pay, and they sent him to psychological evaluations and so on and so forth. This was the standard procedure in those days for air traffic controllers and pilots or anybody who went on record. But I've seen a number of these craft when I was professionally flying, and I just said, okay, I've seen them for a lot of time of my life, and this is another circumstance. I don't need to prove it to anyone.
Mm-hmm.
So
you know, this brings more understanding why, when I had friends in American Army, former times when Americans were in Heidelberg, they are not now anymore there. I was asking them about UFO topics. You know, it was very strange because they were reacting strongly, denying, like too strong. Their reaction was too strong for me to not think there is something in it, because they were reacting like, no, this is not true, but very aggressively.
Yeah.
So that explains, you know, this contract.
Well, that's right. And it explains the fact that they are told how to respond to certain things. I mean, think about this. And we were talking about recent so-called personalities that have come out and said, okay, you know, this and this and this and this and what have you. And everybody says, oh boy, somebody's finally saying something. And we'll go through that article together where I show you where the bait is and where the switch is. But the idea here is that they are told what to think, and they are told what to say and not say, and they are told when to shut up and how to obey orders. When you look at the Roswell incident and the memoirs of Colonel Marcells and the other military officers that were there on the day and were part of the recovery, when they were told to be quiet, they came from a generation that had developed out of World War II. And when your superior officer said something, you did it. There was no questioning involved, right? And so thereby, these people were very programmed in order to follow what they were told, and they admitted it themselves in the book. And only after sufficient amount of time and separation were they willing to come out and give certain amount of things. And I've heard over the decades, every decade, I did a lecture in '92 in Los Angeles, and I was told by somebody that says, well, disclosure is 6 months away, it's around the corner. And I said, yeah, sure. And of course, it still hasn't happened. And that is because we will not admit the truth unless we can twist it to be a military threat. And that's what you're seeing now. The military threat is to imply that we must arm ourselves and defend ourselves and be aggressive to anything that comes to our world to visit us, because it is of a threatening, fearful nature. And so being fearful ourselves, we gravitate towards that, and we automatically accept that definition because science fiction and movie media and everything else has produced decades of threatening movies of all the monsters and creatures that are supposed to come from space to do us harm. But yet, if you look historically, record-wise, these craft and their occupants are described for thousands of years, no matter which culture and society you go to throughout the world in ancient times. And they had the same technology or better then, and they could have done anything they wanted to us. Well, all we could have done was throw stones at them. So if they wanted to do us harm, they could have done that a long, long time ago.
We were touching on the disclosures that are coming, and now someone asked me already, because some people call me and ask me questions, comment, ask him about this or that. And this is specifically about the article that about Charles David Grash and his disclosure, like it's a big thing about it. What do you think about it? What do you think? What Glenn is thinking about it? So,
well, what I think is really not that important. It's what you think and the people think that is important, because they have to learn to think for themselves. But to put it very simply, you have to be a critical thinking individual, not skeptical, because skeptical already is predetermined to be negative. But critical means that I'm going to listen to what is given to me, and then I will see, does it ring true with what I know or what I can discover, right? And so I looked at this article, and I'm not going to say one thing or the other about this individual, but I have looked to see some of the what I consider to be holes. Number one, they used a very good bait. The bait is that we have developed and recovered extraterrestrial technology over the many, many decades, and we have reversed engineered it, which is true. We have got things like night vision and lasers and microchips and all this other things is kind of a downstream offshoot of what we have recovered. And unfortunately, the first thing that we are inclined to do as a society is to develop it for arms in order to hurt other people. That's why we have come and become visited, but they have been very cautious about how much technology they have given us, because they know our propensity to turn around and use it for ill means rather than for beneficial means. And so this is not an unknown development or revelation that we have had that. And the fact that we have recovered pieces and intact crafts, because we already talked about that in the 50s. These craft landings in White Sands, New Mexico, in Cortez, in Roswell, in regular Mexico, in the area that's down there south of Veracruz, and other places like this. And so they're not giving you anything new. They're simply using common knowledge bait to pull you in. All right. So it says that we have retrieved exotic origin, extraterrestrial origin technologies and materials. Well, we already released that in the 50s. All right. Yeah. And then they say the Defense Office of Publication and Security review at the Defense Department went ahead and cleared for publication his material. Well, do you really think that the military is going to clear material that is going to expose them? They very carefully vet these documents, and they very carefully black out the things that are harmful to them. They're not going to just say, sure, here you go, and expose us for the frauds that we are. So that means that if they clear something, they have already in mind the use and the purpose for which it is intended. And it's not to inform you, it's to redirect you. And it says here, for many decades, the Air Force carried out the disinformation campaign. Actually, in the 1950s, the CIA took over the domain of UFOs from the Air Force, and from 1960s on, the CIA has been responsible, not the Air Force. The Air Force has their own investigation branch. The Navy has theirs, the Marines have theirs, the Army has theirs, and they don't talk to each other. They are all like little spoiled children that are hiding their own internal affairs and secrets from each other, because this is a game of power. Right. And so once again, that's not any any information of real value. And yeah, right. And that says that a number of potential sources do not trust the leadership in the all-domain anonymity resolution office, which is basically supposedly a recently passed issue by Congress that whistleblowers cannot be persecuted. Well, I got news for you. You remember that very young soldier from about 6 months ago that released the information about what truly is happening in the Ukrainian war? They arrested him within 48 hours, and you've never seen him again.
Yeah.
So if you think that this program of persecution and clandestine withholding of information is not in effect, then you better start thinking again.
Can you comment, because we touched on the subject of safety. Some people say that, okay, I have such an important information, I have to have bodyguards, my life is in danger. And of course, they're coming forward. So people are intensely listening to them because they think, oh, that's enormously important. But considering the safety, we already spoke a little bit. Can you just comment on that, what it is, like, you know, people disappearing. There's this, if you are safe, talking about it or not, like there's a lot of murder around, but nobody really knows. So what's going on there, considering the safety and danger of people who are coming forward?
In the 1950s, that was an issue because you had the government agency, the men in black, that would come and threaten witnesses. 3 of them came up to George Adamski in the property up there, Palomar Gardens, and threatened him, and he laughed. And because he had already been briefed by the space people that they intended to come and that what to expect. And he said to them, I know who your superior officers are, and I know their names. And if you don't leave me alone, you're going to find this plastered in front of every newspaper in the area. And so they left him alone from then on. But many people were antagonized and threatened and bullied and all of this. And this happened for a period of about, probably 15 years from 1950. Well, since Roswell, 47, they were doing that till about, around 1965. And some people, some very well-known people like James Forrestal and Maurice Jessup and Professor McDonald and some others were so-called suicides when in reality they were not. And I think it's pretty common knowledge of that fact now too. But in recent times, if you look at if you look at the UFO field, it is such a kaleidoscope of garbage that there's nothing for anybody to worry about. There is so much an intensity of misinformation from within the own community, because each one is trying to promote themselves. Each one is trying to make something out of zero experiences. So they are trying to abuse not only the subject, but to abuse the confidence of the people who are generally trying to wonder what's going on. To me, this is extremely shameful that this is allowed to happen. And some of these people, they will say, well, you know, I'm here on the stage and these are my 2 bodyguards. I know one of these individuals. And what I have to tell you is so important that I have to travel with bodyguards. And as I told you earlier, I said, there are no bodyguards in the world that can effectively protect you. I mean, if we can't protect the President of the United States from getting gunned down like an old dog in Dallas of 1963, and all these other things, you have no chance whatsoever. As I told you before, if you go and leave your hotel room and you go out to dinner, somebody comes in, puts a few drops of some kind of chemical on your toothbrush, you come home, brush your teeth, go to bed, and you never wake up in the morning. If they want you dead, you're dead whenever it is convenient for them. And there are no number of bodyguards or precautions that you can effectively take. And that's what John Kennedy said, is if somebody wants you, there's nothing you can do about it. So the idea here is that this is merely used as bait, because right away the public quietens up and listens to every word this person says and says, oh my God, it must be so revealing and so important. And that's nothing more than a circus sideshow performance act. And that's all it is.
How comes you and your parents and George Adamski were safe? How did you organize it so you were safe through this period of time? Because you could say that, you could have this argument that if they actually killed someone, it means this person revealed some information that not supposed to be heard by the public, but yet you didn't get that much attention, because those people who are really promoting strongly themselves, as you said, they're using certain presentation, they use the uniform because that gives authority. So there is a certain manipulation here. Perfect one. Yes. So how you kept yourself safe?
Well, I know that Adamski was shot at twice, and that it didn't affect him. I know my father was told in the mid-60s when we were completing our citizenship papers in the U.S. that you had better keep your voice down for a while so that they don't deport you. And my father said, big deal. I'll just go back to Europe and raise hell there, just like I did here. And so there was never any physical threat. In fact, I think that by that time, there was a greater recognition of who had actual information of some value. Like I told you, my parents being invited to NASA and Goddard Space Flight Center and to the Pentagon and the British House of Lords, they were given entrance and exposure and interaction at levels that are usually beyond most of the people in this field. They could only wish to have that kind of a resume as my parents had. And so I know, like I mentioned when we went to Mexico, that the Pentagon had forwarded to the Mexican military police a abbreviated dossier of my parents and their activities and what have you. And so they knew very well what we stood for. And my father was very careful. He did not believe in accusing people, right? He said to his audience, says, listen, I understand why the powers that be behave the way they do, because we have given them dominion over us. We tell the military, you protect us, don't bother us with the details. And so they say, okay, that's fine. We accept that responsibility, and thereby they feel they can do what they deem is necessary in order to so-called protect the situation and the local environment and the status quo. And so he says, I understand them, and you get a lot more, you interact more bees with honey than you do with vinegar, as he liked to say. And so he didn't outright accuse them. When he wrote the book Alien Bases on the Moon, he did not insult NASA. He said, listen, there's a lot of information. They do not have the staff, personnel, or equipment to go through it all. In fact, there are warehouses full of material. They no longer even have the equipment to look at the data that has been collected, let alone the personnel or the budget to do it. And he said, so I gained access and I'm doing them a favor. And in a way, many of the people that he interacted with agreed with that and said yes, because they were then not worried about what kind of attention they attracted, but at the same time allowed access to information that would help bring the subject out. It's not important who you are. What is important is what you represent. And so, but we are very judgmental. We want, Admiral so-and-so or Senator so-and-so or President so-and-so to come out and say, here it is all on a platter, because that way we don't have to think. Mm-hmm. That way you can be fed anything they want to feed you, and you happily and readily accept it because somebody has a so-called personality. But you have to, that's what made George Adamski so unique, because he never laid claim to that. What he did is he said, I'm a simple person. I had these experiences. I have this evidence, and I'm making it available to you. And so...
so he's not after them. So it was very peaceful, and finding, I believe in that too, finding the language of communication, even if we don't agree how we go about it. So
yeah, I had an interesting thing that happened to me. I had a friend of mine that I started dating, and she had a friend of hers that was in the FBI. And she told him about what my interests were, and he thought that was a bunch of nonsense. He said to her, I'm going to go and I'm going to check the database on me and see what I can find out. So he goes into the computer, and he finds out that my file is so highly confidential that not even the district director can access it. And then he sat back and he started to think, he says, well, if there was nothing to this, then that wouldn't be the case. Obviously. So it left him kind of speechless. And so I said, well, I'm not responsible for that. That they decide what they're going to track and what they're going to say. And I think they have found that all in all, my family's efforts have never been accusatory. Basically, when it comes down to it, we try to educate the people, and we try to give them true information. What is being shown now is they're trying to push very hard by bait and switch this narrative of non-human type extraterrestrials. And most people are willing to accept that because they have seen it on television so many times that that for them it has become almost second nature. And so, but when it comes down to it, no matter what anybody says, and I'm not the only one who says that, but there's not many of us, maybe a handful. There are 4 types of visitors: human being, humanoid, robotic, like the gray, and the android, which is a upscale version of the robotics. Both robotics and androids are non-biological, non-sentient beings. They are machines, and machines only. And so when you get here, there are people running around there, and I could name them if I wanted to be ungracious, but I will not. And they run around and say, well, there's, I came across 150 different species and this and that and this and that. It's all a bunch of bull is what it is, because once again, they are giving the people what they are accustomed to hear and what they are accustomed to believe, and they think that that will give them the final authority over the subject, and that's not the case at all. And I always get problems from that notion. In Rome, the one fellow could not possibly wrap his head around the fact that there weren't all these different species that were coming here.
But let's make that very clear. The species you are talking about, they are material. You can touch them, you can see them vividly. Because, of course, psychic people, they do see other creatures, they have visions, they have some sort of connection, but those beings are far away, maybe from other constellation, maybe there is this telepathy involved.
Maybe it's their own minds and their own saturation of because what happens is if you watch it being broadcast to you, and you sit there and absorb one of these shows like Alien or Predator or Insurrection or any of these other stuff, then you have imprinted that notion into your mind, into your subconscious. And so consequently, then perhaps you're tired or you're stressed, or you add other psychological factors to it or environmental factors to it, and then the mind jarbles it all together and mixes it up. And so, because from the biological standpoint, these creatures cannot build, they do not have the mental capacity to transgress out of their environment. So in other words, the crocodile does not suddenly crawl out of the swamp and start walking around and start building radio stations to broadcast radio signals. The elephant doesn't turn into something else and start building spaceships. All these animals, these species, are part of natural evolution of nature, and they are all restricted to the domain upon which they are subjugated to.
Let's a little bit more there, because a lot of people say that those alien gods, hybrids, there is a lot of things in mythology and other cultures that we're worshipping, right? Sphinx, centaurs, all full Egypt is full of gods with, you know, different heads and a human body. Mm-hmm. So this is coming out of somewhere.
You know why? Because we have not recognized the fact that ancient societies did not so much depend upon written language, but instead symbology. The symbology of a being with a serpent's head and wings does not stand for a flying snake, because we have been taught to accept all these things literally, but the serpent is the symbolic representation of wisdom. So the ancients, the ancients developed this symbology. For instance, when you look at the ancient god of Neptune, half fish, half man, right? Yes. This is symbology for a race of beings that once visited this planet that were called the Triterians, and they had the mastery of ocean and air. And so they were depicted as half man, half fish, but it's a symbolic relationship. It is not an actual. And that's where we go so wrong, because if you go into ancient texts, whether it's Tibetan, Indian, Polynesian, Hawaiian, Egyptian, especially early Egyptians, not later Egyptian, because later Egyptians became a conglomeration of Greece and Rome and everything else. And so the Rosetta Stone became our map in order to decipher the so-called hieroglyphics. But the original language originated in Sudan, in Nubia, because that language has never been successfully translated. So you had a group of people who came and inhabited what we call southern Egypt or Sudan, Nubia, and you had a group that came from the north that inhabited the Nile Delta, and they were a different race altogether. And eventually they came together because of, you know, whatever reasons of merging due to war or what have you. And so there is a huge misunderstanding. When you look at the structure in Egypt that lists chronologically the kings, if you look at it, they will tell you that before this point came the people like Horus and Osiris and Thoth and Seth. Well, and what we have decided anthropology-wise is to consider these people to be mythical, to be gods, because we cannot explain their capabilities of what they did. So we changed the narrative, but that doesn't mean the original narrative is what we say it is. We are constantly covering it up, constantly. And especially the Egyptians.
Yeah, because when I looked in the Louvre, those, you know, skulls of those gods, they were really different. So it could be like, some of them, they look like a gray aliens, right, with the eyes. So that's very interesting. And a lot of people who have this access of sensing other dimension, maybe words, we cannot prove it. I have the same thing. I don't know if it's true. I write about it, I talk about it, I read it from cards to other people, and I wonder about it, because I would love to know how can I don't need to prove it, but there is something in it, because it consists of an experience of that person, and it helps these people in their life, if it helps. Because if it leads to, you know, psychosis or schizophrenia, that's something else. But if someone has visions that he was taken to another planet, like this book Mission, we had also someone who met the author of that book. That is pretty interesting, because are they non-physical? And I could sense some of the beings, some of my guests who are also sensitive to those, can sense it, can even have a dialogue, can tell the difference, how they feel, how they look like. So I'm very, very curious because, of course, you know, whether the hybrids were created on Earth, were they in another civilization, I don't know, I can't tell. But I'm hearing all these stories, and there must be a reason why. Is it only symbolic? Or there was indeed siren, or maybe they are sirens, you know?
Well, I think that there is a great deal of, as Schliemann said, who discovered Troy, he said that in all mythology or all oral traditions, there is a sliver of truth, because he was able to then discover certain archaeological ruins based upon some of the truths that he was able to decipher. But we have to understand several things. First of all, nothing has been more destructive to the truth and to the understanding of people than organized religion. At one point, the Egyptian society had over 400 different religions, and each one of them was doing the same things that religions do now. They sell access to heaven, as they call it, or access to better health or to better future. I mean, it's really, when you think about it psychologically, it is basically you know, a class, a very basic class in human thinking, because who doesn't want better health? Who doesn't want a better living, and all these other things? And so you're basically given what you are wanting to hear, and for that you're paying money for. And so these religious sects vied for power, and in fact, the king of Tutankhamun, or Tutankhamun, which was really his name because he was nephew of Akhenaten, but he was the last pharaonic leader of Egypt, because everything after that was through the priests. The priests determined who was going to sit on the throne, usually one of their own people, and everything else. And so you have to understand that a lot of the history is written by those who wish to portray themselves in a better light, or to want to profess a certain dogma. And that is true no matter what civilization that you go to, and all the way up to now, to modern times. And so, you know, so what happens is, once again, when you're looking at symbology, then you find that all kinds of different explanations come. I'll give you an example. I watched a program not too long ago, Native American out here in the Southwest. They went out to some of these petroglyphs and carved in there, and one of them is the symbol that looks like a whirlpool. And if it's going one direction, well, to make it simple, if it goes one direction, it means coming to, and if it goes the other direction, it means going to. Mm-hmm. But this particular Native American said, "Oh, this is a symbol for a wormhole," which is absolute nonsense. And it shows you that, and you can go for yourself, and you can investigate the symbology and its meanings clearly, and see that we have misinterpreted things based upon our own preferences. And so, and that's why we're so confused, because there is no definitive thought. Can you communicate with another person telepathically? Yes, you can. You have to know them, but you can. And you can communicate with the animals in nature around you, because that's all it uses is telepathy, obviously, because it doesn't speak language. And But we have to understand that there are limits. We are so twisted away from natural thinking. When I had the symposium in the Southwest with these renowned scientists, and we did a little symposium in his house, and he invited his friends over, and we began to talk. And he said, what people don't understand is the immense complexity of the composition of the human form. You are designed in order to think, to create, to advance, to experience beyond the confines of your environment at the moment. None of the other species can do that. The lobster does not crawl out the water with a big claw and tries to build microchips. It's not possible. But yet people want to believe that they're going to be sitting a crayfish, or they're going to be sitting a reptilian or whatever, because we have been fed this for so long, and we have zero comprehension of what chemical biology is, how the elements come together, how the molecules combine. Because once you know that the rest of these fantasies are nothing more than just that. It is a pleasure of the mind because it's seen it somewhere else, but it's not based in reality. It just isn't. It's like, if the people want to believe there's a flat earth, well, good for them. It's not reality. And they can call it and come up with every single excuse they want to, alternate dimension or blah, 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 because all they get to do is fling out their accusations, and they don't have to sustain them or substantiate them. I mean, all you have to do is look at a single picture from space, and it tells you what the truth is. Now, you would think that this realization would put it to rest. Here's the difference between the space people and us. They travel, they explore, they rediscover, because you don't discover, you only rediscover what already exists. And they see that for what it is, and they accept it as creative manifestation for all to participate in. But what do? We go out and we look and we see the earth is round, and I say, well, maybe my eyes are tweaked, or maybe the window's bent, or my God, I mean, you can never satisfy the people who wish to dwell in these type of radicisms. I mean, basically, that's what it is. Because wouldn't you want to know the truth and lay it to rest so that you can learn something else? If we do it our way, we never learn anything, because we are constantly fighting the facts about what we discover and try to knock it down, rather than saying, okay, we understand this now, let's move on to the next thing. That's how they progress intelligence-wise, and that's how we are constantly held back by our own imaginations and our own egotistical thoughts.
You see, this is the fault of the education system, not teaching people critical thinking and science. So if we don't have a science behind, it's very easy to believe. Now, what I hope my work here is, I'm attempting to do my best in combining all worlds, because all my life I was sensing things and things were happening. Mm-hmm. Whether it was a coincidence or the law of probability or something else, I don't know. I only know that for some people who will be religious, I saw Saint Mary. I saw something. I have no idea what I saw. So the fact is, I saw something. But for religious people, it will be Saint Mary, because as a child, I was in a Catholic family, so I called it Saint Mary. So there were sort of miracles like, please, Saint Mary, give my parents apartment. Boom, the next day, they got it, right? So it's like a story run in the family. But just something recently, something happened, because I would love to find scientific evidence of all the experience that people have, and they are so-called psychic, because here is so much misinformation. You can be a charlatan and you can make money on it, and nobody can argue with what you feel. Nobody
Sure.
can argue with the feeling or the vision. And you can basically, psychologically, if you know the social psychology, of course, it can convince people to anything. And just to give you an example, I recently, of course, I'm watching all the theories, so as well, I may be affected by them. But recently I met someone who was looking decent, but I rarely have such a feeling. Like I sense the danger around him, like he would be a spy or something. And then when I went to sleep, something woke me up, like like something moved. And I had before I went to sleep, I had a vision about this man, which I never met him in my life. He was a kind man. I just spoke briefly with him and I forgot about him. But I had a vision, just like all those, psychic people, that he was plugged to some sort of a machine, like he was maybe looking like, for some people looking like a vampire, for some people looking like a super soldier, for some people maybe looking like a spy, like something was off and dangerous about him. I forgot about it. And then at night, something wakes me up. I wake up exactly 2:22 in the morning, and I write a message to my partner, also Glenn, and he wakes up that particular moment, so he probably telepathically feels me.
That's right.
Obviously. And he says, I knew it will be you. I just woke up, wrote you back, and I went to sleep. So there is something unique about this experience. Now, let's not be too quick that is super soldier, they are trained by American Army, or Max Spears fantasy. Let's test it out. But I have a lot of those coincidences because, for example, when I'm reading cards, just recently I was convinced that maybe to this person aliens are coming. But then I put in my cards, and whatever negative happened to her, my cards were saying that these are people, not aliens.
Mm-hmm.
I was surprised because I don't know what will happen if someone asks me. I have an idea through my perception, from my mind. But when I read it from the cards, I would never say something like that.
Right. Well, a couple things to consider.
Mm-hmm.
One is the power of thought. Thought is a very powerful, concentrated energy that you receive and you project from yourself. So in other words, if you are hoping for something to change or to get better, like you mentioned in the personal circumstance with the apartment, you are projecting that thought from you. And it is possible for those who receive it to become automatically aligned to it because of the intensity of the thought. It is, it's sort of like faith. The church teaches faith, but really people don't have that because they don't understand what faith is. And so,
Law of attraction.
Well, the law of attraction is something different as well. Now, the law of attraction has to do with what you think, and that broadcasts out from you, and those who are similarly minded can be attracted to you, and vice versa, simply because you're along the same vibration phase, the same frequency, so to speak, the same radio station. You're both having them very close to the same, so you have that. And so these are things that you can project and that you can receive. You also have to understand that everything around you, all of existence, is the ever current now. The past is past, it's gone. The future is coming up the moment you take the next breath. So what exists in reality? The ever-present now. And if you live in the now, then you do not get caught in the past and you do not pine over the future. You are living in the moment, which is the most important. And so, but you can tune in the vibration or the frequency of the past or of those who are around you, right? So, for instance, you can establish a connection to something that has happened, or if nature is very kind, if we tend to do the same things over and over again, then we can expect nothing less than the same reactions over and over again. This is what people like Nostradamus did. He simply looked at the trend of what was being done, and then he simply looked at the next step. Well, if I continue to cause aggression and promote war, then eventually I'm going to have war. Well, yeah, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure that out. But people become mesmerized because they want to know the future, but they never want to be in the here and now. Because if you took care of the here and now, the future will take care of itself. Because when it comes to you, you are prepared to deal with it and to express in it. And so, yes, you can tune in and you can have visions like you mentioned. Now you can do this two ways. You can say, okay, I met this person, and then later on this vision came to me where I pictured this person. It could be because you didn't release it from your mind, right? And so consequently in the back, you keep wondering about this particular interaction of the event that you describe. And so then, you know, you go to bed, and of course you have other thoughts in your mind here, because very few of us can have learned how to quiet and relax our mind in order to get true rest. In fact, what happens is most of the time, and I'm guilty of this as well, is that when I go to bed, that's when my mind starts picking up and starts thinking about this and about that and that, and then it becomes receptive to other thoughts and ideas, and that doesn't do mind well for my health. But the idea is that they are natural explorations that do not belittle the ability of so-called psychism, but it restricts psychism to more natural and tangible expressions, and not to whatever far-flung notion comes thereafter. So if somebody has a vision about something and it comes about, then consequently they think that everything they think is nothing more than a repetition of an earlier vision or what have you, and that's not the case. Each single event is a different event. And so because you are still getting input from many, many different avenues, and each one of them will change your perception of what it is at the moment. And so if you learn to know yourself, right, like the old saying is, you know thyself and you shall know all things. Jesus is not the only one who said it. The Oracle of Delphi said it. Also in India and other places, this is one of the Buddhist rules as well. There are probably about 7 or 8 standard teachings that are all over the world that are common to the ancient sages and teachers who came to instruct us and to educate us. And when you follow those, then religion would not be able to manipulate you. What is it? I think the 5th commandment is that you shall not kill. Well, they're breaking that every single day, right? And so, and I wouldn't worry too much about genetic manipulation, because first of all, we do genetic manipulation with livestock. In other words, we breed racehorses and we genetically manipulate them so they run faster and harder or have more endurance or whatever. So we are doing that ourselves. And secondly, we can take, and through the understanding of genetics, we can eliminate certain genes that have mutated over a certain time, ones that cause autism or MS or certain very unpleasant conditions and diseases, and make it so that they are becoming less and less and eventually phased out of the reproductive system. In other words, on other planets, they do not have all these diseases and they do not have all these problems that we have, because they have long ago phased out of their scientifically and medically out of their structure, so that they can be born basically with a clean slate, with the very best harmonics and best conditions of the cells or whatever. What do we do here? We have people that want to do their own thing. They either drink during pregnancy, take drugs, smoke, all kinds of other things that are detrimental.
Why.
Yeah, other things that are detrimental because we want to do what we want to do and we don't give a damn who suffers the consequences. And so thereby we continue to see an acceleration of all these nasty little traits and diseases and malfunctions and mutations because we simply are not willing to do what's necessary to eliminate them. So it's not necessarily a bad thing.
Glenn, let's jump back to visions to finish that, and let's go back to genetics, because there are two things mixed here. What you're talking about, I understand through the prism of when I'm reading my cards. And so I do not predict future. However, it's very easy to predict. If someone, for example, asks, hey, will I get a job? I can tell that this person, what cards are showing me, will have a job in front, but won't take it because doesn't want to work. You see, I can predict.
But that is a psychological evaluation. What you're doing is you are psychologically also evaluating the person who comes to you. It's like a woman that comes to you and says, well, I get the relationship I want. Well, it is already telling you that that person is out actively seeking for that relationship. And so in order to get something, you have to put something in motion. And so by asking you the question, they are themselves already putting it in motion. So it's not very difficult to say, of course you will.
It's logical as well, but I don't know if I don't know the person, and most of the times I don't know people's lives, and I tell them purposely, please do not tell me details, just ask me questions, because then I have the purity of the reading. And so I cannot know that this person doesn't really want a job. So that is the good example of that. But it happens that you can also read a personality and a little bit of the characteristic from the way someone is talking to you. That's true. I also can read psychologically. But considering those visions or predicting or reading the energy of other people, I have no clue who that person is. So I would love to get as much as scientific here as possible, because again, there is a lot of card readers, tarot readers that are charlatans, because basically you can tell people anything. It's enormous responsibility.
Yes.
Because if you tell them, you direct the course of their life if they believe you.
That's right.
It's enormous responsibility for the reader. So I rather have clients, people who don't believe me, and they test it out. And I say, do not believe my cards, just test it, if it's fitting or not. And I think if we do have that approach, just like to my visions, if we all have that approach that, okay, I had a vision, I woke up in the middle of the night, it could be my subconscious mind, processing what happened and giving me perceptions that I learned among all my life. I have to take that into account. And if I'm willing to put that into a test, if all of the psychic people could do that, then we can actually have facts, have the data, and that would be more and more scientific. Because of course, my work and those people who would like to do it as best as possible and not harm, that's the number one, to not harm someone's life or redirect to the course that they're not supposed to go. And we don't know that, we don't know what's the best for other people. They have to choose for themselves. We just read energy. So we would really, really get somewhere here. That's considering the visions.
Yes, that's true.
I don't want to add something to it, but just to wrap it up about how to make it so we can, differentiate, dissect which specialist to go. I have complaints from people that paid like thousands of dollars to someone psychic. Not only they never heard about this person again, there was no session.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is what's happening on Earth. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. You have summed it up in a nutshell, because this is what's happening on Earth, because you have unscrupulous people who have no compunction about misleading or misinforming, because they never take that thought that you just expressed, that you have an immense responsibility, because by either affirming or not affirming a person's questions or inquiry, that leads them into action that they may not have ordinarily taken. And so consequently, also what's involved with that is the law of karma, because you have set something in motion upon which you will become responsible for. And that's why, most people are, very, cautious or selective upon what they say and whom they say it to and how they say it. I find that all the time. I find that there are some people who have the notion of greater understanding. They either have experienced it in the past, in their lives or past lives, and there are other people who are not. They are products of the current environment and education system, which negates all of that, and so you find yourself doing a very delicate dance upon which you have to evaluate the people you talk to and how much you say and to whom you say it. I find that is a constant challenge, but that's one that is commensurate with what we are doing. If
brilliantly said. I love the way you said it about delicate dance.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Considering the genetic manipulation, because we sort of like jumped into that one, I just had a thought like, yes, that's true. We always do this genetic manipulation. We have the research about it. And if the alien species or the aliens out there, they already dealt with that, and if they did those, genetic improvements, that would be really not a problem for them to create a siren, to create a hybrid, and so on, so on. So now
they do not interfere with nature. In other words, they will not come here and they will not interfere with our natural progression, because we will eventually get to the point, hopefully, where we realize and understand this ourselves. They do not impose their will upon natural creation. They will never do that.
They were probably not doing it for the fun of that or for the ill will, but humans are as they are. Sometimes they use this genetic manipulation not always for the good cause, or maybe very, very often.
Depends on where you're going. So the better word is you saying that earthlings are not that way, but that doesn't mean that the others are not past that point and have progressed to a point which is much more comprehensive than we have. Here, we are still 1 foot in the not so positive lane and 1/4 of a foot into a better one, and we do a little shuffle this way and a little shuffle that way, and we swing and forth, back and forth like a seesaw or pendulum, and we're never quite sure which path we are going to follow, and that is because we are unsure ourselves. We are not, once again, educated, and this has to be more than just the educational system. For people who are parents, this has to be their greatest priority. But that's not the case in this world. We spit out children like piglets. I mean, out they come. The attitude is, well, they'll take care of themselves. And I remember asking, because I've traveled all over the world, I remember being in a country that has a 50% mortality rate. And so I asked the guy, if you can't feed your children, why are you producing more of them?
Yeah, that's
right. I mean, how can you claim to love your children if you let them starve to death? Right. And so what
did he answer?
It never, I don't think it occurred to him. It's just, well, I just make more of them. Big deal. but it never occurred to them the ultimate responsibility, because the teaching of the foundations of this understanding has to come at home before you go to school. Because if we went to school and we had a real school system, then that would apply on top of that foundation and there could be progression. But we go into a public school system where everything is torn down, and everything is caused to confusion. And I think the people are getting sick and tired of it. And the agenda, social agendas of particular groups are being promoted and taught to our children now at first grade. I mean, how dare they try to confuse the sexuality of our children already at the age of 6?
Right.
And this has nothing to do with educating the children. This has to do with brainwashing them so that they will configure and accept these different society groups when they get older, so they will consider them to be normal. Well, I don't care what they tell me. I know what's normal and I know what's not. And I don't care whether they like it or not. It's
But
that
not
simple.
children.
Right? But not children. How dare they?
Corrected.
Right? And so, yes, we don't have an educational system that's there, and we have to blame the parents too, because the parents are looking forward to the day that they can already send the children to preschool because they are not going for an education. They're going for babysitting, so that gives the parents some break at home. Well, I got news for you. If you're not willing to take the 18 or 20 years it takes to raise this child, don't have them. Don't make them. And they do that on other worlds. They do not overpopulate the planet on a whim. That, oh, let's spit out some kids, or let's have some accidents and spit out some kids. They don't live that kind of life. They respect life and creation much more than that. And they understand the responsibilities of it. We're here, we just, whatever.
This good ETs, good extraterrestrial, because we were talking about those good forms, and there are also not so evolved forms that have technology. They can be very destructive to us, and maybe they do have agenda, and they do, those manipulation on purpose, genetic manipulation for their purposes. Someone created those hybrids. I will still get to those hybrids, but next time. What do you think about Max Spears and this idea of super soldier on Mars?
Well, I mean, once again, it's an accusation you can make, and one you can't prove or you provide any substance to. And so from what I know of alien technology, whether it's from the beneficial ones or the not so beneficial ones, they do not have to suit up for conflict. Their technology, whether it happens to be vibratory or laser beam or what have you, is so advanced that they don't have to send people into battle. That happened to them thousands of years ago in their past, but not anymore. And basically, they can. Why would you convert somebody when you can build an android that does all those functions and never gives you any problem, because it's not sentient, it doesn't have a mind of its own, it only follows programming. And it's
easier to not have to wipe out memory of someone. So perhaps those experiments, they were happening because a lot of people came forward, they claimed that. But indeed, they have drones now, they have androids, they have such sophisticated technology that probably it's much easier just to wipe out the memory. But it was pretty known case of Max Spears about being super soldier, like he was remembering things, and he, the whole interview, you probably know the topic about it, right? Yeah, so that was pretty interesting. And considering, that they got technology from aliens in the 50s about microchips, about those machines that changed the perception, some experiments you mentioned on the population on Americans.
That's right.
That is not surprising, and that would be very easily for me to believe that, there were super soldiers maybe they don't need them anymore, who were under experiments, or MK Ultra, you know, the program. So that is probably a fact that that you can you confirm that, MK Ultra?
I will say that we have experimental laboratories, biological and chemical laboratories that are manipulated and fool around with very dangerous concepts. I personally think that nuclear war is not the threat any longer, but biological war is. Biological war can be manipulated in order to fall upon a certain genetic population or racial population. It does not destroy the infrastructure. It only eliminates the human population. And I think to some degree there are certain agencies or certain perceptions that this growing a population of 8 billion, and it grows by another billion every 12 years. We have over 80 million people more born every year than die. So that takes about 12 years to make another billion people. This explosive, irresponsible population that we have will endanger us all from the standpoint of, from the very simple standpoint that the most precious commodity is not oil and it's not petroleum, it's fresh water. You pay more for a little bit of fresh water than you pay for any of those other commodities. And the more people you have, the greater the demand on that particular resource. And eventually it will come down to have and have nots. Hopefully I'm not here when that happens in the future, but I do not see a very pleasant progression. I do not see our willingness to change unless it's absolutely devastation. We as people on this world, we say we want change, but we don't want personal change any more than we want societal change. And so basically, I think that we will push ourselves up against a wall and upon which there may not be too many alternatives.
It's not only water, it's the air. It's you probably heard the chemtrails.
That's nonsense.
That's nonsense.
I've flown airplanes for 45 years in my life. I've flown dozens and dozens of different airplanes all over this planet. And I can tell you right from the get-go that there are no extra tanks to put anything else in these aircraft. An aircraft is designed to fly each and every time based on several factors: weight, center of lift and center of gravity, and outside density, altitude, or atmospheric conditions, the pressure and the temperature. And that is different on every single flight. And when you look at these airplanes, they have tanks in the wings, tanks in the belly to carry gas. And most airplanes do not have a fuel ejection system. In other words, any aircraft that is under 250,000 pounds takeoff weight does not have a fuel dumping system. It does not have the plumbing. It does not have the valves. None of those things. Only aircraft above that. So if you look at a particular airliner's fleet, 70% of those aircrafts are under the 250,000 pounds, and the other 30% or so are over that for the long haul kinds of flights. There are no extra tanks. There's nothing in the fuel that makes that. What happens is we have different engines now than what we had in the past. Before we had turbojet engines, and now we have fan jet engines. The old engine was small, and only 25% of the air went around the inside canister. Now the engine cowl is big, and 70% of the air goes around the canister and only 30% through the engine. What this means is that when that air comes out the other side, the burner is 800 degrees or 700 degrees, but the outside air temperature is about minus 55 degrees. When those two meet each other, you get a contrail, not a chemtrail, a contrail. which is nothing more than the vaporization of the moisture in the air as it intermixed with the hot exhaust of the engine. The fan jet engine creates a much longer one. I've gone across the North Atlantic because all the traffic at night goes to Europe and all the traffic from Europe comes during the day. And we're all stacked up at 30-mile intervals at 1,000 feet apart. And all of us have these long contrails behind us because those are the product of our engines. It has nothing to do with chemicals. Now, here's the logical point of this. Right? If you were dumping chemicals at 30,000 feet going 500 miles an hour, you also have winds that are at different velocities at different altitude. So at your altitude, the wind may be 100 miles an hour. 5,000 feet below you might be a completely different direction at 50 miles an hour. Another 5,000 feet lower and still different again. What in the world could you possibly spread that would have any effect? It would be like, to excuse the terminology, peeing into a hurricane. You would go nothing, nowhere. Why do you think that crop dusters and chemical dusters of crops have to fly so low to the ground in order for those chemicals to take any effect into the crop? Because they know if they dump it out at 50 feet, only a portion of them gets to the crops and chemicals below. Right? If you dump it out at 30,000 feet, where do you think that's going? It just it atomizes and disperses. And so none of these aircraft have that. And I know these launches, they show you a picture of the inside of an airplane that has these big tanks in it. But they don't show you the outside picture. And the outside picture is because it's a firefighting tank. A tanker that it puts all the firefighting chemicals in it and then flies over the low level over the forest fires and dumps the chemicals off to start the fire. So they only give you half the picture and say, look, 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 this is proof that they're putting chemicals on the airplane. Well, sure, it's a firefighting airplane. What do you expect it to do? I mean, so that is
just talking about a regular pollution of the air from the petrol, from the oil. And of course, there is a lot of misinformation here because just not thinking logically about the dispersion of, this peeing in the hurricane, that is very descriptive. And I hope this will make a lot of people think. I was thinking myself, and I was always going back and forth between this idea of chemtrails and see, the circled X, in the sky, and that was always making me think, okay, the air is polluted. I don't care if it's chemtrails, if it's something, it's probably the pollution. But of course, someone else told me, the ships are polluting even more. So we are polluting anyway, in every sense, our Earth. So the air, there are heavy metals in it. The crops with pesticides, the food loses its quality. So on every level it's happening, and we do not need anything additional because it's polluted enough. But what about those planes? You will about the weather manipulation and a HARP project, because Russia officially admitted that indeed they are manipulating weather, and it's very known. And every time, in Sochi, they have to have a beautiful weather, and it's normal for them. And I know from the expat people living in Moscow, that this is actually also true. They were viewing it, and they do. As much as, you cannot talk about a lot of things in Russia, this topic is.
Yeah, some of them they're very open about in Russia. So it's a two-tiered thing. First of all, clarification. Contrails are the vapor mist where the mixture of the hot exhaust air intermixes with super cold air and moisture at that altitude. The average altitude between 30 and let's say 39,000 feet is 49 degrees Celsius to about 57 degrees Celsius. And if you go across the pole, it's even colder. That's minus. So you have an extreme cold air suddenly slapped together with extremely hot air. And then the moisture, which is in the atmospheric content, becomes that mist, that contrail behind the engine. And the reason that you see it more is because we now have highways in the sky. And these highways in the sky are based upon GPS positions at a particular place. So for instance, there may be a highway in the sky that goes from Munich to Mannheim, and it's based upon the GPS coordinates of those two coordinates or something in between. That's a highway in the sky. At Mannheim, you might intersect another highway that is going north or south or whatever. To make it simple, you have all these airplanes that are traveling in different directions, meeting at the same place, and thereby dispersing to different locations. So when you look up, you say, well, look at all these contrails that are overlapping each other. That's because you're at an intersection like a freeway in which all the highways have come together to this one spot, and all the cars come together to that one spot until they go and disperse a separate direction. So that's that. Secondly, let us remember that what is it that our atmosphere is composed of? It's not oxygen. It's 78% nitrogen.
Oh, nitrogen.
78% nitrogen, 21% oxygen, and 1% trace elements like argon and other ones. So we have a nitrogen environment. And yes, we do breathe oxygen. That's true, but we are taking each breath with that chemical differential in there. We're not just breathing in pure oxygen, we're breathing in that mixture. That's what sustains us. And it's true that the average long distance flight, the engines of the aircraft will burn enough atmosphere to be equivalent to one person's consumption over an entire lifetime. That's why that's important for us to progress past the old stage of how we do things. But we have the ability and knowledge to do that, but we don't do it because everybody wants a $49 airline ticket to go somewhere. So we ourselves are to be to blame because we want everything cheap, 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 and we can't expect them to operate under those conditions.
I can tell flights are no longer cheap, but do you think we do have technology that we do not need petrol anymore?
Yes.
That can fly differently now.
Unfortunately, we should have gone, our natural progression should have been from electrical to hydrogen. Unfortunately, all these EV or electrical vehicles are based upon the mining of all these elements that are more pollutive and destructive than petroleum. Right? That's right. And so the entire bottom of the car is one big, huge a battery. And so consequently, we are producing more pollution by producing these vehicles rather than less. And what we don't tell the people is every 10 years, that battery becomes obsolete and it will cost you 20,000 euros to replace it. But that's what they want, planned obsolescence. So you will continue to buy new cars for the rest of your life with never-ending car payments. But if we had gone to hydrogen power, and we do have that technology, all you do is pour in a couple liters of water, and it produces the energy in the hydrogen engine to do all that you need to do. Our real destination should be electromagnetic power, upon which the entire the planet itself produces hundreds of trillions of volts, like Tesla demonstrated with his Tesla Tower. And that where we should really be going, because then there are no pollutants involved whatsoever. But we do things ever so slowly, incrementally, in order to accommodate the economic market of who's going to be making that wealth and who isn't. And that's why we don't get anywhere, because somebody's always abusing the system.
Yeah, that's very important to say. I would love to do next part with you, but for the purpose of this title, I thank you very, very much for today. Another great portion of information, the facts. We stick into facts and we into scientific approach, no matter what our experiences with aliens, with visions, with extraterrestrial, life forms, anything. because I think it's time that we can differentiate better and navigate better, no matter what the experience is.
Right. Yeah. Like my father said in his book, he said, what did he say? The truth is not what is painful. It is the sudden realization of it. And that's when we finally wake up to reality and what is. And sometimes we have to discard old thoughts and previous assumptions, and to be able to grasp something new. As Adamski said, you cannot put new furniture into a room until you take the old one out.
Obviously, very nice said. Yes. Okay, let's do part 4, I suppose. And till the next time, and please write us comments. Don't be shy. Write the questions this time below the video, and we will be happy. Probably Glenn will answer every question you have.
Yes.
Every possible, whatever he knows there. And I'm curious of more about your personal experiences with aliens, with the entities, and more. Now, more of you. What are your experiences next time? Thank you very much, and till the next time.
All righty. Have a good day.